All right, Lakers fans. Let's get into the latest buzz around the league and what it could mean for Los Angeles. The big story right now is that the Portland Trail Blazers are reportedly shopping Jerami Grant, and the reason is pretty simple. They want to clear his contract off the books. The Blazers are in a weird spot because, on one hand, they have been competitive and have shown real promise this season. But on the other hand, Grant's deal is a heavy burden that could slow down their long-term flexibility. The report suggests that Portland is aware they might have to give up assets to make this happen, but they are willing to do so in order to gain that breathing room. Here's the key detail. Grant has multiple years left on his contract, and that's what makes this such a complicated situation. He is currently making around $32 million this season, and the deal continues with a larger figure next year and then a player option after that. Realistically, he is likely to pick up that option, which means any team that acquires him is taking on a long-term commitment, not just a short-term rental. For the Lakers, who are trying to preserve cap space and maintain flexibility, that is a major consideration. Normally, if you're not in a win-now mode, you would simply avoid taking on that kind of contract. But the Lakers are in a position where they might be willing to make a move if it can push them closer to a championship this year. So the question becomes, is Jerami Grant worth it? Under normal circumstances, I would say no. If Portland is only offering a couple of second-round picks or something minor, then you just leave Grant where he is. But if the Blazers are willing to include multiple first-round picks to offload the contract, that changes the equation. The comparison that keeps coming up is the Desmond Bane trade, where people often forget that the real cost wasn't just the first-round picks, but also the need to move a contract like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope's to make it work. In that sense, Grant's contract is actually more expensive than what it looked like at first glance, because you're not just paying for the player, you're paying for the time he remains on the books. Now, the Lakers have a real need for a player like Grant. He is the type of wing who can space the floor and defend multiple positions, which is exactly what this team has been missing. Grant is shooting efficiently this season, and his numbers show that he can still be a major contributor on both ends of the floor. He can play either forward spot, slotting in at the 3 or the 4, and he offers that blend of shooting and defense that makes a roster significantly tougher to guard. It's easy to see why the Lakers had interest in him previously, and why they might still be considering him now. In fact, it feels like Portland may be kicking themselves a little for not making a deal with the Lakers when they had the chance. The Lakers were reportedly interested in Grant before, but they didn't want to part with the kind of draft capital Portland was asking for at the time. They wanted a clean deal, something that would help Portland get off the contract without sacrificing too much. But now, with Grant still on the roster and still locked into that massive deal, Portland is likely realizing that the cost of keeping him is higher than they expected. The tricky part is that, if the Lakers do decide to pursue Grant, they will need to get creative with the roster and with salary matching. That's why there's been talk about moving Jared Vanderbilt, because if you're going to take on a large contract, you need to clear out as much salary as possible to make the deal work. Vanderbilt's contract is one of the few pieces that makes sense to move if the Lakers are trying to add salary without losing too much in return. There's also the argument that Andrew Wiggins could be a better fit than Grant, and that's a debate worth having. Both players bring similar skill sets, but Wiggins is younger and his contract situation is different, which could make him a more attractive option in some scenarios. At the same time, the Lakers have to consider the bigger picture. If they take on Grant's contract, they're not just buying a player, they're buying a path to potentially reworking the roster in a bigger way. You have to think about how the move could open up additional opportunities. For example, if you're able to get Grant and a first-round pick, you now have more assets to work with. You could then use those assets to pursue other upgrades. Or you could even consider a larger trade down the line that involves a player like Herb Jones, or another high-level defender who could instantly upgrade the starting lineup. But again, this all depends on whether Portland is willing to include enough draft capital to make it worth the risk. Grant's contract is heavy, and if the Blazers are not willing to part with multiple first-round picks, then the Lakers would have to decide whether the short-term boost is worth the long-term burden. The reality is that there might not be many teams willing to take on his deal, which gives Portland some leverage. They can afford to wait, because they know that if they hang on to Grant, he still has value as a player. He's not a bad player by any means. He's simply expensive and the contract is long, which is why the Lakers have to be strategic about whether they want to be the team that takes that on. Another angle to consider is the Lakers' potential plan for the offseason. If they do decide to take on Grant now, they could view it as a move that helps them in the short term, while still leaving room to pivot later, even if Grant is difficult to move later. You could potentially let the contract play out and use the cap space in a future free agency cycle. If a superstar like Giannis Antetokounmpo or Nikola Jokic ever became available, having Grant's contract could be part of a larger plan to facilitate that kind of blockbuster move. It's not a guarantee, but it's the kind of strategic thinking that could justify taking on a heavy contract in the present. At the end of the day, the Lakers are in a position where they have to balance the need to win now with the need to protect their future. Jerami Grant is the type of player who can help them win now, but he comes with a cost that could limit their flexibility down the line. So the question becomes whether the Lakers are willing to take that risk, or whether they will stay patient and wait for a better opportunity. Right now, it feels like Portland is the one who is under more pressure, because they are the ones carrying the contract. The Lakers, on the other hand, can afford to be picky because they have the leverage of their own assets and their own cap space. But the rumors are real, and the possibility is there if the Lakers can find a way to make the math work. And if Portland is willing to give up enough to make it worth it, then a deal could happen. The question is whether the Lakers are willing to commit to that path, or whether they will decide to wait for a more favorable scenario. Either way, the next few weeks could be pivotal for this team, and it will be interesting to see how the Lakers respond to this opportunity. All right, Lakers fans, let's keep rolling and dive deeper into the implications of a potential Jerami Grant trade, and what it could really mean for the Lakers' roster construction and championship chances. If you're thinking about Grant as a piece, you have to understand that he is not just a good role player type of addition. He is a high-impact wing who can guard multiple positions, hit threes consistently, and even take over a game when needed. The reason he is so valuable is because he fits the modern NBA mold. He can defend, he can shoot, and he can play both forward spots. That versatility is something the Lakers have been missing, especially in playoff basketball where matchups become everything. Now, let's talk about the actual trade mechanics and what the Lakers would realistically need to give up in order to make a deal happen. The Blazers are not going to just hand over Grant for nothing, especially when they know his contract is a burden they are trying to shed. If the Lakers want him, they are going to have to offer something that makes sense for Portland. One of the big ideas being floated is including multiple first-round picks in the package. The thing is, the Lakers are not exactly flush with first-round assets right now, and the ones they do have are valuable. That's why any move involving Grant has to be part of a bigger plan, not just a one-for-one swap. You can't mortgage your future for a single season, unless you are absolutely convinced that it's the missing piece that takes you to the championship. One of the scenarios that makes sense is using the Grant trade as a stepping stone to a larger roster overhaul. Imagine the Lakers trade for Grant and a first-round pick, then turn around and use those assets to pursue another top-tier defender like Herb Jones. Suddenly, the Lakers are not just adding one piece, they are completely reshaping their core. The key here is that the Lakers would be turning some of their current role players and mid-level contracts into long-term assets that could elevate the team's ceiling. In this sense, Grant is not the final destination, he's a catalyst. He creates the flexibility and the leverage to make a bigger move. But of course, the other side of this is the risk. Grant's contract is a long-term commitment, and the Lakers would be taking on that burden for at least the next 2 seasons. That's not a small thing, especially considering the team's current salary structure and the fact that they are trying to maintain cap space for future moves. The Lakers have to ask themselves, is Grant worth locking up a significant portion of the cap for multiple years? The answer depends on whether they believe they can win a championship now, and whether they think Grant is a piece that can actually push them over the edge. If the Lakers truly believe that this is their best chance to win, then it might be worth it. But if they are still in a transitional phase, then taking on that contract could hinder their long-term goals. Now, let's look at the alternative. The Lakers could choose to focus on other targets instead of Grant. Andrew Wiggins is one of those names that keeps coming up, and for good reason. Wiggins is younger, has a contract that might be easier to work with, and has shown he can be a reliable two-way player. But the difference is that Wiggins would likely cost the Lakers an asset to acquire, whereas Grant could potentially come with a pick attached. That is the kind of detail that can swing a decision. If you can get a player who fits your system without losing assets, that's usually the better move. But the question is whether Wiggins is truly the better fit, or if Grant's shooting and defensive versatility is more aligned with what the Lakers need right now. Another factor to consider is the Lakers need to clear roster spots and manage salary. If they take on Grant's contract, they will need to move out salary to balance the books. That's where players like Jared Vanderbilt, Gabe Vincent, and others come into play. The Lakers could package multiple players in a deal to absorb Grant's salary, and in doing so, they would open up roster spots that can be filled with younger, more flexible options. That's the kind of strategy that can pay off if done correctly. The Lakers could essentially upgrade their core while also freeing up space to bring in players who can contribute in specific roles. But the challenge is making sure that the pieces you trade away are not the ones you actually need. For example, Gabe Vincent is a solid backup point guard who provides stability and experience. Jared Vanderbilt is a physical defender who brings toughness and energy. Moving these players could create gaps in the roster that would need to be filled. The Lakers have to weigh whether the benefits of adding Grant outweigh the cost of losing depth and role players who contribute in meaningful ways. It's a balancing act, and it's not something that should be taken lightly. Now, let's talk about what this means for the Lakers' championship window. If the Lakers were to add Grant and another top defender, they could potentially build a starting lineup that looks something like LeBron James, Austin Reeves, Herb Jones, Jerami Grant, and a long-term center like Aodosunmu or another rim protector. That kind of lineup would be versatile, tough, and capable of matching up with any team in the league. The Lakers would have shooters, defenders, and the kind of size that makes it hard for opponents to score in the paint. It would also give them the kind of lineup flexibility that could keep them competitive, even if LeBron's role changes in the future. However, the reality is that the Lakers would still need to make additional moves to fully round out the roster. They would need depth at the wing, a reliable backup point guard, and a strong interior presence. That's why the idea of using the Grant trade as a stepping stone makes sense. It's not just about adding Grant. It's about using that addition to reshape the roster into something that can contend for a title not just this year, but for years to come. Before we continue, we ask that you leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any exclusive Lakers updates. Moving on. Whispers have begun to circulate around the league, suggesting that a significant shift in the balance of power in Los Angeles may be quietly taking shape. According to people familiar with the situation, a player currently under contract with the Clippers has reportedly accepted a proposal from the Lakers, a move that, if finalized, would instantly ignite debate across the city and beyond. For now, nothing is official, but the mere possibility has already captured the imagination of executives, fans, and analysts alike. The idea of a player crossing the hallway between the two franchises is always loaded with symbolism. The Clippers, long fighting for their own identity and respect, have invested heavily in building a competitive roster. The Lakers, on the other hand, remain driven by their tradition of star power and relentless pursuit of relevance at the highest level. Any transfer between the two is never just a basketball decision. It becomes a statement about ambition, confidence, and belief in a project. Sources suggest that the Lakers' proposal was structured to appeal not only financially, but also competitively. The pitch reportedly focused on a defined role, playoff visibility, and the chance to be part of a narrative that stretches far beyond a single season. From the player's perspective, accepting such an offer could be seen as a calculated risk, trading familiarity for opportunity and exposure. Inside league circles, opinions are divided. Some believe the move would signal the Lakers' intent to accelerate their plans, while others see it as a gamble that could backfire if expectations spiral out of control. There is also the question of how Clippers management would respond, and whether this could trigger a chain reaction of roster adjustments. Until contracts are signed and announcements made, everything remains in the realm of speculation. Still, the rumor alone is enough to remind everyone that in the NBA, silence can be as loud as a buzzer beater, and that the most intriguing stories often begin long before anything becomes official. Stay informed exclusively about Los Angeles Lakers news. Subscribe to our channel and hit the like button to keep receiving daily updates. Also, share your opinion on the news in the comments, as your contribution is crucial for the Lakers. Stay tuned for the next video.